So we are going to be talking today about our work to improve literacy outcomes, to improve reading and writing skills for individuals who require augmentative and alternative communication. We started this project probably about 10 years ago, and it has been a very, very exciting project for us. We continue to work and continue to have very positive outcomes. We first got involved in this area because we were very aware of how important it was for the individuals that we work with who require augmentative and alternative communication, how important it was for them to learn to read and write. It would allow them to participate more in education, to get a better education. It would enhance their employment opportunities, their chance to get a job later. It was going to support their personal expression and also their social relationships. So David and I have 3 teenagers at home, and all of them are very dependent on literacy skills to interact with their friends through texting, through Facebook, through other social media. And without being literate, it's very hard now to have social relationships and friendships. And finally, it's to allow access to enjoyable leisure pursuits, to surf the internet, to be able to read for pleasure, etc. So those are reasons that are important to all of us, regardless of whether you use augmentative and alternative communication or not. But there are some additional benefits for individuals who do use augmentative and alternative communication. If you are able to read and write, having access to literacy skills expands your communication options significantly. Now you're able to say anything you want. You don't have to wait for someone to give you a picture or to give you a bliss symbol or to teach you a sign. You can, in fact, on your own, independently communicate any message that you want to. That's really to have access to the true generative capacity of language. It also, we have found, expands other people's perceptions of competence. Once children are able to read and write, the schools see them in a very different way and believe that they are learners and that they can achieve and can participate much more fully. And so it changes others' perceptions of their competence and also increases self-esteem, because that's something that we value a great deal in society, being able to learn how to read and write. So there are many, many reasons why we want to be able to teach children and adults who use augmentative and alternative communication to read and write. Unfortunately, at least in the United States, and I think it is the same here, the outcomes traditionally in terms of learning literacy skills have not been good. Many individuals who use AAC in the past did not attain basic literacy skills, or they did get some literacy skills, but they were far behind where their typical peers were. And we think that those poor outcomes have happened for a variety of reasons. Sometimes we have had low expectations in terms of what individuals who use AAC can achieve. And most importantly, we really haven't known what to do or how to go about teaching reading and writing skills to individuals who have either limited speech or no speech. Because much of what we know about how to teach reading and writing requires people to be able to produce oral, spoken responses. So we have been trying to work on developing ways to teach literacy skills that are accessible for individuals who use augmentative and alternative communication. So what I hope to do today, this morning, is to share with you some of our research project that we've been involved in. I will describe to you the instruction or the intervention that we have been using with the children and adolescents that we've been working with, what skills we have taught them, how we have gone about teaching those skills and the materials that we have been using. I will share with you some case examples of some of the children, some from very early in our project and some from more recently. And the project that I'm sharing with you is part of a large grant that we have from the U.S. Department of the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research there. So I brought, at least virtually, 3 of the participants from our project today to share their stories with you. The first individual is Braden. Lena will remember Braden because many years ago when he was one of our first participants in the project, Lena was involved in intervention with him. You'll hear a little bit more about Braden later, but he has cerebral palsy and he was 4 years old when he started in our project. And then this is Anna, and Anna has a diagnosis of autism. And she was 3 years old when she started in our project, learning how to read and write. And this is Krista, and Krista was 8 years old when she started in our project, and she has multiple disabilities, a motor impairment, she has a tracheotomy to help her breathe, she has a visual impairment and also a hearing impairment, so multiple disabilities. And had very limited ways even to communicate when we first started to work with her and teach her how to read. So we'll be coming back to these 3 children. They'll be helping me to tell you the story of how we go about teaching children and adolescents who use augmentative and alternative communication how to read. So these are the 5 key components of our project of how we go about teaching literacy skills. The first is to think about providing enough time. The second is to make sure that the skills that you are teaching are appropriate skills, that those are good things to be teaching. The third is to think about what procedures, instructional procedures or techniques you're using, and that those are ones that are effective. The fourth is to make sure that there are adaptations that allow individuals who cannot rely on their speech to still participate actively within the instruction. And the last is to make sure that you have a positive rapport and that the instruction is in fact motivating. So I'll talk a little bit more about each one of these, and then we'll start hearing some of the case stories of the children that we've worked with. So the first one is to make sure that you have enough time devoted to literacy instruction. In the United States, there are federal guidelines that tell the schools that you must be spending at least 60 minutes a day teaching reading and writing to children, just typical children who are learning to read and write. If children are at risk for literacy skills, you actually should be spending then additional time, 30 to 45 minutes in addition, even an hour more on top of that. But very often, at least in the American schools, that doesn't happen. And so when we started our instruction, we were aware of making sure that there be enough time for literacy instruction. And we, with our kids, try to start them at a very early age. So you will see some examples of children as young as 3 and 4 starting on literacy instruction so that by the time they go to school, in fact, they have some reading and writing skills and have that foundation there already for being able to participate within the educational curriculum. We also try to encourage the schools and the teachers that we work with to provide instruction on a daily basis. But I did want to let you know that in our research that I'm going to share with you today, we did not provide intensive instruction. So in fact, we set up our project so that we would be sure it was very realistic for people to do in the real world. And therefore, the children that I'm going to show you today, they had only 1 to 2 hours per week of instruction in literacy. So not very much, and you're going to see the substantial gains that they made. So we can do things with much less than the ideal. It should be very manageable for us to be able to achieve this. And we have, I brought some of the younger children today to show you, but we have worked with individuals as old as 14, 15, much later, who had no chance when they were younger to learn how to read, and we have had very successful outcomes with them as well. And on our website that I'll share with you later, there are videotapes of those older children learning how to read and write as well, so that you can go there to see them also. And David, are you going to show a little bit of that in your transition presentation tomorrow as well? Okay. So we need to put enough time aside to teach literacy skills. We also need to make sure that we are targeting or working on the important skills. And as the introduction said, we work on it in two directions. We are working on the small skills to make sure that all of the components are there in an analytic way, but by the same token, we are working holistically to make sure that they have opportunities to apply those skills in meaningful reading and writing activities. So we do read to the students a lot and talk about the books that we're reading. That's very, very important and should be going on throughout their education and their careers. We do teach phonological awareness skills, and I will be talking much more about this as we go along, but the understanding and awareness of the sound system in the spoken language, being able to break words into the individual sounds, or being able to blend together the individual sounds to make words. We also teach the letter and sound correspondences. What sounds do specific letters make, and what letters represent specific sounds. We teach decoding skills, how to take a word and go from the letters to the sounds and blend them together to read those words. We work then on using those skills within shared reading situations, on recognizing words that are spelled irregularly and recognizing those words just by sight. I think that Swedish is a much more regular language than English is. There are a lot of exceptions to the rules in English, and so some words you can't sound out, you just have to memorize. I think Swedish, am I right, is much more regular, following the same rules. We teach kids how to read and understand books and other texts, and also do the same kinds of things for writing. So we will, with the children, be walking through each of these skills in a couple of minutes. In addition to teaching appropriate skills, we also want to make sure that we are using good instructional techniques to teach those skills. And what we do with the basic skills, like learning letter sounds and learning phonological awareness skills and learning decoding skills, is to use direct instruction, to work with the children by first modeling the skill, demonstrating or showing them what to do. We then provide what we call guided practice. That means that we provide them with enough support, enough scaffolding support or prompting support to help them perform the skill successfully. So we help them to achieve the skill if they need a little bit of help. And then we gradually take away that help or that prompting until they are able to perform independently and produce the skill themselves. And then we allow them opportunities to practice independently. It does take time to learn to read and write, and you need practice to learn how to do that. And so we try to make sure that the children have practice in those basic skills. But it's not just practice in the basic skills. They need to understand how this all comes together in learning how to read and write. And so we give them lots of opportunities to apply those basic skills in meaningful literacy activities, reading activities, and writing activities. This does several things. It helps to increase motivation. You're more excited about learning to read and write because you can understand what power it will have, that you can then get on the internet and find those websites that you're interested in, or you can read that book that you're interested in. It helps to encourage the children to generalize and use their skills across a wide range of materials, not just the materials that they've been taught with, but a wide range of materials. And it just provides additional opportunities for practice. Ultimately, what we want is that the children become very fluent, that they don't have to think a lot about those basic skills. They are able to think more about the meaning of what they're reading and the meaning of what they're writing, and they don't have to think about the basic processes underlying that. Okay? So it gives them a chance to integrate all those component skills that they need to be able to read and write. Now, as I said before, at least in the United States, almost all of the curricula that we have to teach reading and writing skills require students to be able to produce spoken responses. They have to be able to say letter names and sounds. They have to be able to sound out words. They need to be able to break words down into the component sounds. And obviously, the kids that we're working with, Braden and Anna and Krista, are not able to do that. They either have no speech at all or they have very limited speech. And so what we've tried to do is adapt the materials so that you don't have to respond orally. You can instead point to a picture, point to a letter, point to a written word, respond using another format of some sort. And I'll show you examples of the materials in a minute when we get to the cases. We also try to help the children compensate for their lack of oral production. We model that for them, and we encourage them to rehearse it subvocally. We say it in your head, so that they are doing the phonological recoding in their head, even if they're not able to actually produce those sounds. And you'll see us working with them on that phonological, that subvocal rehearsal, the phonological recoding happening on an internal basis. So those are some of the adaptations, and you'll see examples as we go along. And then lastly, many of our kids have a history of failure. They haven't had positive experiences necessarily with academic skills like learning to read and write. And so one of the things that we really work on is building that positive rapport and making sure that the instruction is very motivating for the students. And so we build on their strengths, the skills that they have where they are already accomplished and strong. We capitalize on their interests, and you'll see some examples of that. Whatever they're interested in, we bring that and incorporate that into our instruction to increase their motivation for learning to read and write. And we focus on the instruction itself, and for the children, for example, with autism who have a lot of extraneous behaviors, we don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. We focus on engaging them in instruction instead, and you'll see some examples of that. And we're very conscious of celebrating their success as they go along and ensuring that they are successful so that they are very motivated and interested in learning how to read. Okay. So those are the 5 components of the instruction, and you'll see examples as we go along of each of those components. So let's start. This is Braden with Lena many years ago, right, Lena? One of the first boys that was involved in our literacy instruction. He was 4.5 years old when we first met him. He has severe cerebral palsy. He was not able to walk, and he had limited function with his hands. He could point with a fist and could point to areas that were maybe 2 or 3 inches square. He was attending a preschool when we first started to work with him. He loved sports. Penn State University is a big sports university, and Braden was very engaged and very interested in sports. And so you're going to see, as Lena's working with him, that we incorporated a lot of sports and athletic activities into his reading. When we first met him, he was using some vocalizations to communicate. He had a few word approximations, but not very many. He had a light tech or low tech communication board with pictures that he used. and he was currently waiting for funding for a speech-generating device. So at that point in the United States, there were fairly lengthy processes for getting funding from the government to get a speech-generating device, and so he was currently waiting for a speech-generating device. He was not yet literate and had not been exposed yet to any type of literacy instruction. So you're going to see him from the beginning and him making progress as we go along. So the first thing that we did with Braden was to target the first 3 skills, and we work on them concurrently. So we target about 3 to 4 skills at a time and work on them together to build the basic foundation. And the first 3 skills that we worked on are the ones that are in bold. It's a little hard to see the bold, but we worked on reading to him and talking about the text. We worked on building his phonological awareness skills, and we worked on teaching him the letter-sound correspondences, so the letters and the sounds that go with them. Later, we'll come to these other skills, but those are the places where we started with Braden. I'm not going to talk a lot about reading to him and talking about the books. That's a very, very important component of literacy, but there's more information in the literature on that. If any of you have questions about it, we can talk more later. I'm going to focus much more on actually teaching him to read and write, because I think there is less information out there on that, and probably you have more questions about that. So I'm going to focus on that area. Okay. So in the area of phonological awareness, remember we said that this is knowing about and understanding and perceiving the sound system of the spoken language. So being able to segment words into individual sounds, or being able to take individual sounds when you hear them and blend them together into a word. There are many, many phonological awareness skills, including things like rhyming and syllable segmentation, etc. We focus on 2 skills primarily: sound blending and sound segmentation. And we focus on those 2 skills because they are the most important ones in terms of learning to read and write. The other ones are nice skills. They're important skills, but not as important. Sound blending and sound segmentation, or phoneme segmentation, are the ones that are most highly correlated with later positive reading and writing outcomes. So because there are so many demands in the lives of these kids, we focus on the skills where we think they will have the biggest impact. So what do we do in terms of sound blending? Basically, what we want the children to be able to do is, when they hear sounds segmented apart, that they can blend them together in their heads, figure out what the word is. Okay? So in this example, you see 4 picture communication symbols, PCS symbols. These could be anything. They could be photographs. They could be PCS symbols. They could be symbol sticks. They could be bliss symbols. It doesn't matter. Whatever makes sense for the child. Okay, they're the representations of 4 different words. And the first one up in the upper left-hand corner is the PCS symbol, the Mayer-Johnson picture communication symbol for map. The upper right-hand corner is light. The lower left side is bag, and the lower right-hand side is nap. So we actually would review those symbols for the children so we know that they know what those symbols mean. It's not a test of whether the children know those symbols or not. It's just a way for them to be able to respond. So we would label the symbols for them so we know that they know what those symbols are. We're then going to say the word for the children, but say it slowly. So for example, we might go, map. Okay, saying it slowly, extending each of the sounds. Okay, and the children then have to listen, blend those sounds together in their head to figure out that in this case the word is map and then they would indicate it by pointing to the picture of the map. Okay? So that's basically how we go about teaching them to internally blend together the sounds, because when they go to learn to read, initially they're slow at that process, and as they look at each of the letters, they'll hear the sound in their head, but it's slow, and so they need to be able to blend the individual sounds together to figure out what word it is. Okay? I should have said earlier, if there are questions as I go along, feel free to ask. Okay? All right. So let's see a videotape of Braden doing sound blending. This is very early in instruction with him, within the first few weeks of instruction. He's working with one of our graduate students at that time, April, and April is working on sound blending with him. You're going to see her review the symbols for Braden so that he knows what they are, and then she will say a word slowly. Braden needs to blend it in his head and then point to the symbol to represent the target word.
Are you ready? Now this time I'm going to say a word long, and I want you to make it short. Okay? Okay. Okay, watch. This is top. This is toss. This is top. This is toss. This is boss. And this is tap. Which one says toss? Toss? Does toss say toss? Yeah, it does. Good. Good. Good job.
Okay, so you saw April went through and reviewed, and they were actually very close together, the words. So one was toss or throw. One was top, the top of something. One was boss, which changes the first sound, and the other one tap, I think, was it? Tap. So they're very close together. He really has to listen and then be able to blend and make the selection. Okay. We also do work in sound segmentation or phoneme segmentation, and this is the opposite approach. Sound blending that you just saw is important for reading. Phoneme segmentation or sound segmentation is important for learning to write. And this is when you have the whole word and you need to now break it into the component sounds. So if I'm a child and I want to write the word cat, I hear in my head the whole word cat, but to actually write it, I have to break it down into k, a, t. Okay, and that's the process of phoneme segmentation. In this case, again, what we're going to do is present the child with the four symbols, list symbols, photographs, PCS, symbol sticks, whatever you use. Label them for the child. So in this case, the example here is bat, mop, cat, and I think this is tan, although it probably doesn't look like it up there. We're going to then say the target sound or phoneme for the child, for example, b, and show them the letter as well. And then the child has to look at the pictures, hear the words, and segment out or separate out the first sound of those pictures and select the one that starts with the target sound. So in this case, for b, it would be the bat. Okay. So let's see Braden now doing some sound segmentation, again with April, and this again is very early in instruction.
And listen. So here's what I mean. Like this. Did you hear that sound? Did you hear it? Yeah, it says this letter, huh? Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at these four pictures. This one says up. This one says tag. This one says net. And this one says pop. And then we listen to the one that starts with t. Does that one start with t? You think so? Tag.
So you can see, not only does he think he knows that that's what it starts with. So again, she labels the different symbols, up, tag, whatever the other ones were, and then shows him, says the target sound, shows it to him, and he selects the one. We start with segmenting out the first sounds of words because those are the easiest to segment out. We then teach the final sounds because those are the next easiest, and those middle ones are the hardest, so we do those later. Okay. At the same time that we're teaching those phonological awareness skills, we're also teaching the correspondence between the letters and the sounds. So in this case, we will provide the child with an array of letters. It might be, 4 or more letters. We see M, T, A, and B here. We're going to say the target sound, not the name, but the target sound. In this case, B, for example, and the student needs to point to the letter that produces that sound. So let me show you Braden again with April, again early in instruction.
All right. Which one says t, t? Good, good, good job. Okay, are you ready? Which one says good, good. Which one says good, good job, good. Which one says Is that the right one? That one? The T? Does the T say t? Yeah, it does. Good.
Okay. So there are a few principles around teaching letter sounds. First of all, we focus on the sounds of the letters, not the names. I'm assuming you have the same thing in Swedish, do you? A sound and then you also have a name. So letter names, at least in the American schools, they do a lot of times teaching those to young children. It's actually a big waste of time. You don't use those letter names for anything unless you have a very complicated name and you have to spell it for someone, but most of these kids are not yet there. They'll learn them. Or in the United States, it's a big thing to have spelling bees. Do you do that here where kids stand up and in school they're told a word and they have to spell it out loud? Yeah, sometime anyway. But those are the only times you really need the letter names. To read and to write, you need to know the sounds. And if you learn the letter names but not the sounds, it's actually very confusing. You go to read the word cat, and instead of going k-a-t, you're going C-A-T, and that doesn't help you to read the word. So we teach letter sounds, not letter names. Once the kids know all the sounds, then we go back and teach the names, but not initially. Okay? We teach one letter at a time until the child knows that letter, and then we add in another letter, and we review the old one, etc. This is the sequence that we use in English, but you will have to develop your own sequence in Swedish because it will be different. Number one, I know that you have some letters that we don't have, obviously, and the sequence that you want to use will be in a different order. But there are some rules, and I can share those rules with you. First of all, unlike what happens often in preschool programs or in early school, we teach the lowercase letters, the small letters, before we teach the capital letters or the uppercase letters. And we do that because when kids look at books, the huge percentage of letters are lowercase, not uppercase. Okay? And so we teach lowercase first because that's what they're going to see mostly. And then we go back and teach the uppercase afterwards once they know the lowercase. Okay, is that the same here, that they tend to teach uppercase first to the little kids? And yeah, so we do the opposite. Okay. We teach the letters that are used most frequently in words that children would be able to read and would use. So don't just take your frequency vocabulary for adults because those are based on different words, okay? But what kids would use most frequently. And we teach those first because as soon as the kids know a few letters, we teach them how to start to read words. And so if we just go in alphabetical order, A, B, C, D, E, they have to get pretty far along before they can read any words. This way, with a different order, they can learn more words more quickly early on. Okay? We also teach letters that are dissimilar in terms of how they look and how they sound first, so that there aren't confusions, and later we add in the ones that are more similar. So for instance, in English, M and N look very much alike, and they sound very much alike as well, so we don't teach them together. We separate them out. Okay? All right. So this is what a first instructional session would look like, probably 20 or 30 minutes, about 10 minutes doing phonological awareness skills, 5 to 10 minutes doing letter-sound correspondences, and 5 to 10 minutes reading and talking about books. You could do that all at once if you have a child who will sit that long with you. If not, you can do it in 3 different sections, in 5 different sections, whatever works best. Okay? Now, clearly that's not enough. Braden's not reading yet, so we need to do much more. And the next thing that we're going to do with him is, as soon as he can do sound blending, and as soon as he knows about 6 or 7 letter sounds, that's all, we're going to start him with decoding words. And as he learns then more letters, we'll add those in and teach him even more words. But we'll get him up and reading very early on as soon as we can. We'll also teach him to recognize by sight some words that are difficult, irregular in English. And we'll have him using those skills while he's reading books with us. So now, in a minute, we're going to talk about decoding. Okay, so just a second first. So we also will continue to teach more letters and sounds, review the ones he already knows, and as he learns new ones, we'll introduce new words to him that use those sounds. We're going to keep practicing those phonological awareness skills because he will become more automatic and not have to think so much about them. And we will keep reading to him and talking about the text. Okay, so here's how we do decoding. Again, we're going to give him 4 pictures. This time we will also give a written word as well. And you'll see that we've very carefully selected the pictures. One of them is the correct answer, bad. One of them changes the first sound in the word, so we have read, okay, which is the same but changes the first sound. One of them changes the last sound in the word, so it's beg. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is beg. And then we have one that changes the middle vowel, bad, and that's the lower left hand side. We'll review the pictures with him again and make sure he knows what they are. We'll then show him the target word. If the child cannot point themselves, we will help them point to the letters to focus their attention. We'll encourage them to then, as we point to each of the letters, say the sound in their head, blend those sounds together, and then figure out what the word is and point to the picture. Okay? So let's see Braden learning to decode. He's with Lena now, and he is learning to read the words. He's very interested in sports, so Lena's done a great job developing some reading materials for him that have various athletes, like a football player and a soccer your football, our football, American football player, and a real football player, right? Seeing various things around, and those are the words that Braden needs to decode to figure out what the football player or the soccer player, as we say in America, is seeing right now. Okay, so here's Braden.
Okay, let's read what the basketball player sees. The basketball player sees, look at the letters. Listen to the sounds they're making. Is it pen, clap, pet? Is it pet? Yes, it is. Good job.
can see, you can almost see the wheels ticking as he's trying to figure out what the word is. As soon as the kids start to do some decoding, we'll get them into reading books as well. So we'll take either books that we developed for the kids, and they're simple to do with getting photos from the child's family or their school, or alternatively taking photos from the internet around things that they're interested in. We'll also take commercial books, real kids' books, and we go through and look for words that the child should be able to decode. We highlight those in yellow. You can just use a highlighter pen or whatever so the child knows which words they're responsible for reading. We read the rest of the text to the child, but stop at the word that the child's going to read. This is a book that we did for one of the little girls in our project, Ellie. Ellie also has cerebral palsy like Braden, and this was for Halloween in the United States. Do you celebrate Halloween here? Yes, okay, so you understand getting dressed up in costumes. And this is Ellie. She was going to be a ladybug, as you can see, and my very clever students photoshopped her head onto the costume of the child, so this is actually Ellie as a ladybug. And the instructor is going to read to her, "I am a lady," but then Ellie has to decode the word bug. And then she loved this part. These are her sister and her brother. Leah was a cat, and she decided that Grant, her brother, was going to be a trash can, or garbage can, which she loved this book. It was her favorite. And again, the students photoshopped their heads into these pictures. And then what Ellie would do in this case is indicate the answer or what the word was by pointing to the picture, bug or cat or can, in this case, once we got to her word. In this case, in the video coming up, we're going to see Braden and Lena reading Pig at Play. This is a commercially available children's book about a pig that tries out for a basketball team. And Braden, as I told you, was a big sports fan, so he loved this book. And at first, the pig does not make the basketball team because he's too fat and too slow, but he works out and then makes the team and gets the winning shot and whatever else. So here's one of the pages, for example. This is the actual story, and you can see we've gone through and targeted the words that Braden should be able to decode. Hooray for pig, that's one of the words that Braden would read. Now I am hot, he could read that as well. And so we would just go through with the highlighter and make sure he has a set of pictures that he can use to read these words. So here's Braden with Lena now, reading Pig at Play. In context, he uses his speech to answer and then also points to the pictures to answer some or to read some of his words as well.
Think of three. You say, what is that? You're like, oh no, she's thinking of three. Hooray for love. Yeah, good job. Hooray for pig. Now I am hot. I dribble down. I make the shot. Wow, it's jumping up and he has the ball in the net. Wow. I cannot miss. We win the game. Yay. Rocky said yay, yay. They won the game. Basketball Pig is my name. Yay.
He's such a great kid, isn't he? So excited about reading and having the chance to learn how to read. We also taught him how to recognize sight words, so words that were more complicated but that he was interested in, like football or basketball. It would be a while until he had the skills to decode those words, but he just learned to memorize them and recognize them by sight. So we did that for highly motivating words, as well as irregular words that occurred frequently, words like school in English, etc. And for these words, we would either give him 4 pictures, if you could do pictures of the words and say the word and have him choose the picture. I mean, not say the word, sorry, show him the written word and have him match it to the picture. Or alternatively, we would give him 4 written words and say the word out loud and have him choose the picture that it went with. So now a typical instructional session is longer. Again, it could be in one session or broken up into smaller sessions throughout the day. We spend about 5 minutes or so teaching letter-sound correspondences, continuing to teach new ones and reviewing old ones. About 10 minutes working on decoding skills, 5 or 10 minutes working on sight word recognition skills, about 10 minutes on shared reading activities like Pig at Play that you saw, and then about 5 minutes just reviewing those phonological awareness skills to make sure that he keeps getting practice in those skills as well. Okay. So to sum up with Braden, we worked with him until he was 5 years old. He had about a total of about 40 hours of instruction, but that was spread over about 40 weeks, okay, so just an hour or so a week. He, by the end of that time, demonstrated phonological awareness skills, so he could do that with greater than 90% accuracy. He could segment out words with greater than 90% accuracy. He knew all of the consonants, the letter sounds, and all of the short vowels like a, I, and he was learning the long vowels a, e, I, o, u. We teach the short vowels before the long vowels because in English, to get a long vowel, you have to have a complicated rule, like a silent E at the end of the word, or 2 vowels together and only the first one makes a sound, and that's more complicated. With regular words, it's always a short vowel, and so we teach those first. Okay? And those were the ones he knew. He was reading several hundred regular words by then and able to decode new words that he had never seen before, provided they used the letters that he knew and they were spelt in a regular way. They didn't have some kind of odd rule to them. Okay? So he was participating actively in shared reading activities. He was beginning to read sentences independently on his own. He entered kindergarten school as a reader and was fully included in a regular education class. Braden was actually one of our first children in the project, and he's now actually in the end of elementary school, going into starting to get ready for high school, and he's participating within the regular education curriculum because he had that reading foundation when he started out doing reading and writing with the rest of his class. A little bit slower, just in terms of him being able, in a motor way, to produce text, but keeping pace with the other kids. So he had a great start in his reading and writing and was able to keep that up. And let me introduce you to Anna. Anna was 3 years and 10 months old when we first met her. She had a diagnosis of autism, and she was in a preschool program with reverse integration. So there were children with disabilities in the preschool, and then regular, typically developing children that attended the preschool as well. And she had a one-on-one aide to help, especially with her behaviors in class. She loved Mickey Mouse, and she loved Sesame Street, Elmo, and the other characters. When we first met her, she had just a few signs that she could use to communicate, just 3 or 4. And she also had probably 5 or 6 PECs, so picture exchange communication symbols, where she would hand a picture of something that she wanted to her aide, and the aide would provide it for her. She had some vocalizations, but really no intelligible speech approximations. She was very, very frustrated, and she had a lot of challenging behaviors, biting and screaming and hitting. And she'd not yet, as most 3-year-olds had not yet learned how to read yet. We started with her initially working on her learning phonological awareness skills, as we saw with Braden, both sound blending and sound segmenting, and also learning the letters and the sounds. And then we focused on teaching her to decode words, as we saw with Braden, to recognize irregular words or harder words that were very motivating to her, to recognize them by sight, and also then to apply those skills in shared reading activities. So let's see Anna very early on. This is when we first started working with her within the first couple of weeks. So we've been working with her for less than 5 hours, and this is one of the sessions on letters and sounds. She was actually able to produce a few sounds, and you're going to see her, rather than pointing to the letters, she's actually going to use her vocalizations to say the sounds. And so far she's just working on 2 letters and sounds, ah and mm. Okay, so the first sound that she had learned was and then she's just learning ah, and you can see me modeling it for her quite a bit and her doing a good job starting to get it. When we taught Anna how to do sound blending, we used some visual supports for her. I'm not sure, but in the United States with kids with autism, because of the difficulties sometimes processing spoken language, we use a lot of visual supports. Is it the same here, pictures or so in her case, we didn't just teach sound blending with her having to listen to the words auditorily. We also presented her with the written word. We pointed to the letters in sequence as we said the sounds for her. So this is mad or angry. And you'll see pointing to the letters and going mad. Okay. Anna just has to blend those together. She doesn't have to read all the letters and sounds yet, although you're going to see that she's starting to recognize some of the letters and that she does produce those sounds as well. And then in her case, she's used to PEC, so I'm actually going to be holding up her choices for her, and she's going to choose the word once she's blended it together. So let's see Anna doing sound blending early on. And again, this is in the very early stages of instruction, just after a few hours. And in the early stages, because she had so many challenging behaviors, we would only work with her for maybe 5 or 10 minutes at a time.
He's mad.
So she really loved all of the emotions, and because of the challenging behaviors, we started to introduce her to some of those concepts like mad rather than biting and hitting. Now you can tell somebody that you're mad instead. So you can see I get into this. Okay, this is Anna now, a little bit later, decoding, but again, very early on. You might have noticed in that other tape that when she sees the letter and sound, rather than just saying it once, she's repeating it several times. Did you notice she's going d, instead of mad? You're going to see her still doing that. We're working with her on it, but she still has that little repetition. In this tape, I think she reads the word cat. And if my memory's right, maybe dad, but I'll check after I watch the tape. And this is her just about 28 hours of instruction, and she's already decoding.
What is it? Good cat. You got it, Anna. Good for you. Good. She said it. Mad. He's mad. Do you see him mad? He's mad. What's this? Dad, you're right. There he is. Dad. Oh boy, hi, Dad.
You can see in the books that we've got with her, we've got photos or pictures. We cover them up when she goes to read the words, so she can't just look at the picture to know what it is. But after she signs it, like cat or dad, or says it, then we can lift it up to, she can check herself to see if she's been right or not. We then worked with her on expanding her skills, so teaching her how to read longer words, so not just consonant, vowel, consonant, short words, but also consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant words, consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant words like wind and stop and flag, those types of words. We introduced her to some simple decoding words, like the silent E in English that's at the end of the word that makes the vowel sound long, so like ride or hope or, anyway, can't think of anything else. We continued to expand her sight word recognition skills, teaching her more high-interest words, and gave her lots of opportunities to read. So let's see her now with a much bigger vocabulary. This is a little bit later in instruction, but only about a month or two later.
That's your first one. Okay, let me see if you're ready. Good job. Can you say it out loud? Rug. Rug. You go to the circle for, go to the rug for circle time. So here's the pan for cooking eggs. Nesta, are you ready? Man, stop! Man, stop! Stop! Are you ready? Here comes your next one. Hands up. I see you. I see you. Sometimes in the morning you hide your eyes, and I say, I see you. I see you. Ooh, there's that boy. He's a mess. He's a mess. A baby, yes. Oh, it's a dirty baby. It's a very dirty baby. Yes. He's a mess. Wind. It's windy. Windy outside. The wind is blowing.
So you see how many skills she's starting to develop, both reading longer words, reading some irregular words, and learning some of the rules for long vowels as well. I hope you also see how much her speech is starting to develop. And again, we've seen that with many of our children. Once they learn how to read and they know the letter sounds, it really seems to facilitate their speech production because they have a visual support now for knowing what sounds to produce and in what order. So it's really starting to come along and much more spontaneous than when we first started with her. We now, and it's not too much longer, have her up and reading whole books. She's learned words like Mickey and Minnie as sight words. Those are some of her favorite words. She can decode words like fun and hugs. So I'll show you now a little clip of her reading this book on her own. We have the pictures covered again so she can't see them until after she reads the sentence, and then she looks. Okay, so, and then Mickey, of course, the big romance. Mickey kisses Minnie in the end. And you can see these happen to be books that we've put together on topics that she likes, but honestly, it takes no more than a few minutes to put together a book, enough time to type the sentence underneath and to put in a picture of something that she's interested in. The next step then with Braden and also now with Anna is to start to really build on reading comprehension. So as you can see with Anna, she's definitely decoding or recognizing each of the words and doing it in sequence. But what we don't know for sure yet is she processing those words together and understanding them to get the meaning of the whole sentence? And for kids like Anna, who came to us with just a few language concepts that they could express, it's hard to know whether they have sentence structure internally or not. So we're going to now work with Anna on reading comprehension. It's complex. She has to be able to track through the sentence from left to right, to decode or recognize by sight each word in the sentence, access the meaning of each of those words, then process them all together to get the meaning of the sentence or the longer story, and then relate that to what she knows about that topic to really understand the text. When we first start with the kids, especially with kids like Anna, who had very limited communication skills or language skills when they started, we first work on very basic comprehension, so the most basic level, and then we're going to go on from there and build more complex kinds of skills. So let's see how we do the first steps in terms of figuring out, does Anna know how these sentences go together and what they mean? What we want her to do is read each of the words and process them together. We're going to present her with 3 or more, 4 pictures that could represent the text. Give her a sentence to read. She has to read the sentence and then choose the picture from the group that best represents the text. And we select the pictures very carefully. So let me show you an example. On the left-hand side, is the book that she might be reading. The photograph is covered up to start out, so she can't see what's under the yellow. We just use Post-it notes, so it takes 2 seconds to do. And then we have a sentence underneath. And this is when we're first starting with her. We don't know if she's got the comprehension of agents, people, and actions. So we're starting at the most basic level of a sentence, and we'll gradually build to more complex language. This is Max, who's her brother, and he's napping. Okay? And you can see on the right-hand side the picture choices that I'm going to give her. One is of Max napping, and that's at the top left-hand side. And then on the top right-hand side is Max hopping, and underneath is a picture of her mom pretending to nap. Okay, and that, of course, is very funny because any of you who are moms know that you never get a chance to nap, but in any case. Okay. And you can see that for her to get the right answer, she can't rely on just decoding one of these words, like Max, and then just choosing, or naps, and then just choosing. So we make sure that to understand and get the right answer, she actually has to decode and read both of the words and put them together. Once she then makes her selection of the picture, she can take off the Post-it note, and she has also the visual feedback of whether she's right or wrong. Okay? So let's see Anna. This is her first really starting to read sentences and learning about understanding them. So she's now had about 50 hours total of instruction, so not very much time, especially if she had been getting an hour of instruction a day. We're only at 50 days, which if you're at school 5 days a week is only about 10 weeks into school, so not very long at all. She already knows the answer, of course.
For you, let's read it. Here we go. Good. Max naps. And look, there he is. He's sleeping.
So she obviously is, but again, we don't know starting out whether she's able to or not. Okay, we're then going to move on, and of course one of the things that happens in the United States at least all the time is the way we really assess reading comprehension is kids reading books and then having to answer questions about them, and I'm assuming it's similar here. So we want Anna to be able to do that we also don't have to make all those pictures all the time because it's sort of a nuisance to do that. So we're going to now have her read a sentence on a page, and we're going to start by having her answer the question right after she reads that page. That's easier for her from a working memory load perspective. So don't start by having the child read the whole book and then have to answer all the questions. It's too much for them in the early stages to hold that all in their head. Have them read 1 or 2 sentences, answer the question. 1 or 2 sentences, answer the question. And then as they develop their skills, they can read 2 or 3 pages and answer some questions, and then another 2 or 3, and gradually more and more. But you need to build up to it gradually, okay? So that's what you're going to see Anna doing. We start with very simple factual questions. So what, who, what is Mom doing? For example, those simple, easy questions from a linguistic point of view. Once kids are doing well with those, we move to the inference questions like why and how. Those are harder linguistically. You have to then infer information from the text. Okay, so start with the simple to ensure success and then build to more complex. And the child can respond with speech if they're able to, with signs if they sign, by pointing to pictures or by written choices in multiple choice questions, or by typing the answer. or by using letter cards to spell out the answer. So in this example, you're going to see Anna using letter cards and putting them in order to spell out the answer to the question. Okay? And in a minute, I'll tell you how we taught her to do that. So we're going to deal with writing in a second. So here she is. She's reading a book again about Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, her favorite. And the question that I'm going to ask her is, what does Mickey give Minnie? So she's going to read the page first.
What does Mickey give Minnie? Mickey gives... Good. Here you go. Kiss. Good. Gives me a kiss. Good work. Good job. All right, let's see what's next.
So she even gets the double S in kiss, which is great. You can see a couple of things. Number one, I give her more letters than she needs, so that she really does have to choose, but I don't give her the entire alphabet. Otherwise, she spends so much time just looking through letters that you're kind of wasting instructional time. You might have noticed I put them in a circle for her. That's because if you have them in a row, often our heads get stuck on certain combinations when we see them in circle. Any of you ever do those like unscramble word puzzles at all? And they set those up on purpose to trick you by setting up letters together that aren't going to go together in the final answer. So if they're in a circle, you don't run into that problem. It's easier for the kids that way. Okay. Good. Any questions about reading comprehension so far? I am good. Okay. So at the same time that we're doing writing, we're also the same time that we're doing reading, we're also teaching writing skills to the kids. So these actually happen together, but I just broke them out to talk about them separately. So let's talk a little bit about early writing skills as well. First of all, they are really important, and it's interesting that they're often neglected in our instruction, that we don't spend as much time doing writing as we do doing reading, and actually people like it less when you ask them. Kids like it less, adults like it less. They don't like to write as much as they like to read. It's harder to do because there's additional demands on your working memory, whereas with reading it's all permanently in front of you all the time and you can go back and check. With writing, it's in your head. You have to hold it in your head as you try to produce the text, and that's much harder to do. So we do start it, but we start writing just a little bit later than reading. Okay. Skilled writing requires the integration of a lot of skills. You have to know about how to tell a story, or how to explain something, or how to persuade somebody about something. You need to have the vocabulary or semantic skills, the grammar or the syntactic skills, and the morphology or the word endings, the little parts of language. You need to know how to segment words into the sounds so that you can produce text. You need to know the letters that represent those sounds. You need to be able to memorize the sight word spellings of those irregular words. You have to know then where to find them on the keyboard, or if you're handwriting, but all of our kids are keyboard users. And then long term, you need to learn those conventions, capitalization, punctuation, etc. And we teach those conventions later. With writing instruction, as with reading, we teach basic skills. We've already talked about phoneme segmentation or sound segmentation and letter-sound correspondences. We also teach keyboard knowledge, so as soon as the children learn 6 or 7 letters or sounds, even fewer, we will start them on the keyboard with those letters and sounds. And we will teach them encoding skills, how to spell or write single words. And they will, as I said, many of them are using an adapted keyboard. Braden, for instance, was using an adapted keyboard, and Anna uses a standard keyboard, but with some adaptations. And hers, for example, might look like this, where we've taken a standard keyboard, we've put slightly larger letters on it, and you can see we've put them as lowercase letters so that the child can recognize them. The ones that are highlighted are the ones that the child already knows the letters and sounds for, and as they learn new letters and sounds, we will highlight new keys on the keyboard. But they do have access to everything. So here's Anna after about 60 hours of instruction typing some words. She's going to be with one of our graduate students, Elizabeth. She's just getting used to learning to use the keyboard. She does get time to play with the keyboard. That's very important, but you can see you will see in the video, she likes to play all the time on it. You've probably been there. And so Elizabeth is, once she's spelled the word, removing the keyboard so Anna can't play with it, and reviewing the rules with her, which are that you're only using one finger at a time, not your whole hand to push down all the keys at the same time. But you'll see her skills both in terms of phoneme segmentation as well as letter-sound correspondences and her learning how to spell words.
Ready? I'll let you choose. You choose a word. Which word do you want to type? Which one? Okay, you want to type hot. Wait, one finger. Remember our rules. Ha. Ha. Hooray! Very good. Hot. Hooray! Very good. Dad. Dad, you typed dad. Hooray for Anna. Okay, ready? Let's do the next one. Let's do the next one. Bus. Hooray! Bus. You typed bus. 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 Anna typed bus. Good for you.
Okay, so you can see her doing hot, dad, and bus. One of the things that you saw here too is we often let the kids choose the order of things. We'll have a stack of pictures that we want her to spell the words from, but we let her have an element of control. Often for kids that avoids then arguments or fights about what they still spell all the words, but they choose the order. And you see her doing a really nice job with that sound segmentation and how her speech is really starting to come along. We also then, just as we do with reading, we have the kids applying those skills in meaningful writing activities to tell stories. We'll have photos of experiences that they've been involved in or pictures of things that they're interested in. And we use those as visual supports for the kids and then allow them to try to tell stories about that. We make those into books, which is really easy. It just means you have the photo there and you write underneath the words neatly. And the kids then can use those for reading experiences and have little libraries where they can share with their friends. In this videotape, I'm going to show you Anna writing a story. It's a very simple story, one sentence to start out. We'll build more to more complexity. She chooses a photograph that she wants to write about, and the photograph happens to be of their dad hugging their dog, who she loves, their dog. Their dog is called Toby. I'm actually hoping that she's going to write Dad hugs dog, Dad hugs dog, because she can write and spell all of that. But she's more ambitious than I am, and so she decides to do Toby instead, which she has never attempted before. So it will be interesting for you to see her approach trying to write Toby, a new word for her. Again, she can type on the keyboard, but in this case she's using letter cards to spell out the words. It actually is faster and easier for her at this stage, but she's also working, as you saw earlier, on learning to become more fluent with the keyboard as well. So we use both with her.
What's your story gonna be? Who's this?
So I'm going to put out the letters in a circle for her again, all kinds of letters. And
Okay. Dad. Dad. Hugs. Dad hugs. Hugs next. B. Sometimes this one can make an E sound. Let's read it. Dad hugs Toby. Hooray, good girl. Dad hugs Toby. Let's write it out.
so it may have been a little hard for you to understand, but she spells dad and hugs, and then she puts down the T, and I say to her, what comes next? And she says to me, Obi. So she's segmented. She knows now she needs to write Obi. And she doesn't know the long vowels yet, but she figures out the O goes in there. And as you can see when I'm doing some instruction with her, she has learned the letter Y in English is also a consonant and makes the Y sound like yell. She knows that, but not that it's sometimes a vowel that makes an E sound also. So you can see me using that chance to teach her a little bit in there as well. You can see her speech developing, much improved from, remember, at the beginning, her just having a few sounds, so her really getting it. And you also see her starting to learn some of the morphology of language, the word endings, that it's not dad hug Toby, but rather in English it's dad hugs Toby. And she leaves out the S initially, as we often see with the kids that we work with who have the main semantic or meaning concepts, but not all of the endings necessarily. But then when she gets reminded to add it in, when she goes back to read the sentence, she reads it with the ending on the verb, and later we see her begin to produce that as well. Yes?
Question. I was wondering, there is an improvement, an increase in her speech.
Right.
There is an obvious improvement and increase in her speech. Is it also in the communicative?
Yes. So you actually, and I should have stopped earlier. So the question was, did the speech improvement with reading also transfer, generalize into her communication as well? So yes, we saw her relying much more, depending much more, using her speech more spontaneously in her daily interaction. I don't know if you noticed a couple of videos back when she, what were we doing with dad? After she spells the word dad on the computer keyboard, when she's doing the spelling, she says, "Where's dad?" to me. And I say back to her, "Where is dad?" And she says, "At work." So now in context, I could understand that. Out of context, it might be a little hard, but much more use and much more communicative and spontaneous, not just the rote pecs, I want this, I want that, but actually talking about things and experiences. So yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what did we see? We worked with Anna until she had just turned 5. In the United States, 5 is when you start school, our main school, not preschool anymore, about 60 hours in total with her. So again, not very long. If she had had an hour of instruction every day, she would have been maybe 12 or 13 weeks. It, for us, was over a much longer period because we only taught her once a week for about an hour or 2 hours. Initially, even less, 15 minutes we were lucky. She learned all of her letter-sound correspondences, how to read single words and recognize sight words, read many, many words, and she would attempt to read any word that you gave her by sounding it out. And if it was a regular word, she would be successful. If it was an irregular word in English, then obviously that's harder. But she recognized many of those words. She read simple books independently, stories that had about 30 or 40 words, so they're short still, but she's only 5. She would respond, as you saw in that tape, to factual questions, what doing, who questions, and we were working on the harder questions like why and how. She could spell independently more than 50 words, and as you saw with Toby, she would try any word and attempt to do a spelling and do a pretty good job, and we see that in typical kids when they're first learning to spell as well. And she would write simple stories. She entered kindergarten as a reader or a writer. Her literacy skills were well ahead of her typical peers, as were Braden's when he started school, and that made a huge difference. In Braden's case, the school team, when he transferred in, said to us, if he doesn't go to college, it will be our fault. Because he had proved that he was a learner and that he could, in fact, learn as well, if not exceed some of his typical kids. So they took it as a challenge for them to continue to develop his skills with him. And it was the same thing with Anna. She started and was included. She came in at the top reading group in her kindergarten class and in grade 1, and she continues to be in one of the top reading groups in her class, in her school now, and is now in grade 2 and doing very, very well. Okay. Yes? Oh, how did we handle that she wouldn't attend for very long? Is that what you mean? Wasn't up for work?
Yeah, or if you had to make some breaks.
Oh, right.
Like,
so remember I said early on that it could be broken down into small chunks?
Yes.
When you saw her with letter sounds, we would only work with her for 5 or 10 minutes. That would be it. And then we'd go back and do another, 5 or 10 minutes with her. So very short sessions because she wouldn't sit very long. And we also, one of the things that she liked was music. So we incorporated a lot of music in, singing the sounds of the alphabet,
Okay.
With her, those kinds of things to keep her engaged and motivated. As she began to develop skills, she would attend longer and longer. And by the time I showed you at the end, she would have sat for an hour or longer working because she was so
Okay.
engaged with things. But you have to go slow. And gradually, as you've seen, we break down the tasks and then gradually increase the expectations. The other thing with Anna and with the kids with autism, do you notice in the tapes with me, sometimes she's doing various self-stimulatory behaviors. In the United States, some people spend all their time correcting those and stopping those. We don't spend a lot of time on that, provided she's engaged in the task. For many kids with autism, it's a way to let out, particularly when tasks are challenging. So we'll see that come through. As long as they're engaged, we don't worry about it. Otherwise, you can waste all your instructional time on correcting behaviors.
so it could have been 5 or 10 minutes of training and 5 or 10 minutes of free play.
Yeah.
And then
And we
backing up.
used with her when we first started a visual schedule. We actually presented it in writing for her, and we would allow her, we would come in and say to her, today we're going to do letters and sounds. We're going to do sound blending. I actually would use those words with her. We're going to read a book. And she would choose which we would start with. Again, having that control. Now, we had to do all the tasks. We would cross them off when we finished, but she got to choose the order, and that made a big difference, but she knew what we were going to have to do each day.
Okay,
Does that
thank
help?
you. Thank you.
There was another question. No? Yeah.
I just wonder about the order of the consonants.
Yes.
And I wonder, what is your experience about starting up with the so-called fricatives or long
Right.
consonants
Right.
compared to the shorter
Right.
as T?
So we
and so?
start typically with the kids as much as possible with the sounds that can be extended, like s, and
Yeah.
you've seen that in some of the tapes. Now,
Yeah.
the others come along fairly quickly, but they are harder because
Yeah.
they're produced very quickly
Yeah.
and gone. But we do start in our sequence with more of the continuous sounds, the
Yeah.
ones that can be held earlier on, and go to the other ones later. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
How do you do it when she makes it wrong?
Oh, okay. So the question is, what do we do when the kids are wrong? So if the kids are wrong, we will say something to them like, you chose kiss. We need to find hug. Okay, so first we point out the error, but in a positive way, not no, wrong. Okay, positive way. And then we will model for her the correct answer. So if she's reading, I'll trace under the letters and I'll go, hug, hug, hug. Okay, so gradually again, and the answer. And then we'll mix things up. And I didn't say this earlier, but you've probably seen where things are being moved around, so it's not always in the same position. You know all that. So then I will give her another chance to practice that when she's wrong and go through, and she'll have another chance, and we'll cycle back through it again. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Yeah. Here.
Where am I? Okay, yes. I obviously have trouble localizing to sound,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, just one question about, you were talking about reading and writing and
Right.
the difficulty
Right.
level. I just want to ask you to elaborate on that, because
Yes.
my experience is that for some, at least for some learners, reading is more difficult than writing, non-speaking.
Right.
For example, I got the other week a very well-expressed written message from an adult student I had long ago, and he asked for help with software for reading text.
Right.
And he early on became a very efficient writer.
Right.
But reading was
Right.
very, very difficult.
Right.
And my interpretation is that when he's got the meaning in his head, he
Right.
can go to text. But
Right.
going from text to
Right.
meaning is much
Right.
more difficult.
Well, it's an excellent comment, and I actually probably oversimplified when I said earlier, there are a variety of things also that can complicate reading. For instance, if there are visual issues. And remember that many of the individuals that we work with are at high risk for visual problems. And when you get, they may be functional in just daily tasks like eating a meal and getting dressed, but when you get to text, it becomes much harder. For the children with cerebral palsy or adults with cerebral palsy, if there's a lot of head movement, keeping track in a text of where you are and knowing where you are can be difficult. So there can be those added problems that you see with reading that you don't see with writing, where you've learned your keyboard and you know where things are. And then, as you said, if you have your meaning, it can be easier. I was talking about at the very early instructional stages with reading a single word, the word stays on the page there. So if you are slow sounding it out and going, it's always there. I can go back and check, and you may have seen with Anna, she sometimes goes back and starts again because she's started to lose track of the early sounds that she's holding in her head. With writing, I have to hold that whole word in my head. I have to segment it into the sounds. I have to remember what sound I'm on and which one comes next. So it's a greater working memory load. But if you've gotten past that point, which it sounds like this individual has,
Or if you have speech synthesis.
right, to help with some of that. Right, to help with some of that, yeah. Okay.
I have one
Good
more
question.
question.
Okay.
How about the challenging behavior
Right.
of this girl? Did it decrease?
Oh, yes. Yeah, oh, yes, significantly. So we saw huge decreases, and it's a good prompt because here's my next slide. So we saw that written language with it as a visual support. So remember, we started with her, and this seems very bizarre, where expressively she had probably fewer than 10 concepts that she could express. Less than 5 pecks that she could exchange, and less than 5 signs that she could sign. So we started with her very early on. We really believe that using letters and written words improved her speech production, and you've seen that, improved her intelligibility because she knew which sounds had to be there, and there were no more of the deletions leaving sounds out that should be there. She also knew the order they should appear in. And we also then saw big increases in her length of utterances because she was reading longer sentences as well. They actually helped with language development as well, with a much greater range of vocabulary. So you saw us introducing her to words like mass, concepts that normally our kids may not end up with because they just have a very sparse vocabulary for communicating needs and wants, and not a lot to be able to talk about things. And then much more complex sentence structures along with this, and I don't know if I didn't. So we saw a big decrease in her challenging behaviors as well, and much longer attention and engagement. So she went from, if I got 5 minutes out of her early on at one time to work with me, I was thrilled, whereas by the end, as I said, it would be the end of the session, I had to go and she would be ready. And we've seen that with all of our individuals. There are some videotapes on our website of some adolescents who came in at 14 years old, like Anna, with less than 12 concepts that they had learned in 14 years using, 12 PECs, and that was it, who had been stuck there for however many years, who wouldn't attend for more than 5 minutes. And by the end, they would work more than an hour. And in fact, I tell the story of one of the young men, Bren, and I think David's going to show some videotape of him tomorrow. And when the session is over, his dad goes to leave, and his dad has to go to the bathroom, to the washroom. He goes in, and Bren gets up and goes back and sits down again, ready to start learning again. He's so engaged. Again, he was a young man with autism, where he was on primary reinforcers, edibles for them to get him to do anything. We didn't have to use any of those. He was so motivated to try to learn to read, and did really well with it. Oh dear, 4 minutes? Oh dear. You'll have to invite me for 4 days instead. Let me very quickly go through our final case. I'm not going to go all of it, but just to let you know, we also use this instruction with kids who present multiple challenges. So kids who have very limited skills, as I talked about, that have really challenging behaviors or have kind of given up, low expectations, and reduced opportunities. And, the adaptations that we do for those kids, we keep the same components, but we have to look at accommodating the fact that they're older. So we're trying to use chronologically age-appropriate materials with them, and also then accommodating the multiple disabilities. So that may mean, in this particular case with Krista, she had a rare genetic disorder with a visual impairment, motor impairment, hearing impairment, very few signs. She used a very limited vocabulary on a speech-generating device. And we made a lot of accommodations. For vision, we had very large print for her, 80-point font, that's big. Okay. Yellow background to give her some contrast with that, glasses that she wore. We used an FM system with her hearing aids so she could hear better, and we changed the entire order of the letters around so that we taught those that she could hear better first, and then other ones later, and we provided her with a lot of visual cues as well for that. We taught sight words with these kids quite early to really increase their motivation. And we start shared reading activities from square one with them at the very beginning. So in the case of Bren, the young man with autism, his first word that he learned to read was YouTube, because he loved YouTube and getting on there and watching things. He learned it as a sight word because it's a hard word to read. And even when he had only that one word, he had a book all about YouTube that he could read, and every time we got to YouTube, it was his turn to read the word. So a good example. We used visual supports a lot with her as well. So I'm going to skip over her at the early stages. This is of her learning letter sounds. Here she is early on learning to read words. And then I'll show you towards the end with her. Signing Dad.
Hooray, Dad! Hooray! Hooray! Good job. Excellent work. Ready? Okay, we're going to do about 2 or 3 more, okay? All done. Okay, here goes.
Cat, she's signing. So in Krista's case, she uses a lot of signs, as you saw. She's signing Cat. This is one of her early books that we adapted with photos of her experiences, and she learned her own name as a sight word, Krista. And so she would read that, and I would read and sign Summer. You can see the highlighted yellow ones are the words she's reading, and the rest of the sentence I'm reading. And then I hit the ball with Mom, and Mom, Dad, and I went on a train. So you can see her participating even early on with books. She started out being interested in things that were much younger than her, Sesame Street and Blue's Clues and a lot of those shows. As she developed more language skills in the course of the project, she also got more interested in age-appropriate things. So she developed, as many girls in the United States do, a mad crush on Zac Efron from the High School Musical. Do you know Zac Efron here? Okay, so we developed, one of the graduate students did a great little book where they photoshopped Zac Efron in with her, spending the summer with her. She thought was great. So they did all kinds of things, riding horses together and going swimming and whatever else. It was great fun, and she loved it. And this is the first time she's seen the book. The pictures are covered, and please forgive me. I watch this tape afterwards, and I think, oh, I'm horrible in there because I won't let her look at the pictures because I want to make sure she's reading the sentences. Of course, she's dying to see the photos of Zac Efron. But in any case, you'll see by now she's reading a whole sentence together. And this is a little girl who, when we started with her, her goals at school were to match 2 objects. Okay, so she had nothing, very little symbolic. The expectations were very low. And moreover, in her goal evaluation for the last 2 years, she was listed as making no progress in that goal. Okay, so now we're going to see her after 55 hours of instruction spread over a year. She was 8 when we started, and she's now 9, reading a whole book about Zac Efron. And she's using signs. She has a tracheotomy, so she doesn't vocalize much, but she does sign, and she has some approximations because her fingers are fused together, so they're not perfect signs, but intelligible. I'm sorry. I know. See the next picture. I know. Are you okay? Great. Back. And Krista, play, ball. Okay. So, I mean, I had to bring it because she's so competent, just ignore the incompetent instructor with her. But it's just, I mean, it's so wonderful to see her growth in terms of what she's capable of doing and how much she can experience things. I don't know if you noticed, but she invented her own sign for Zach, and it is so you'll see her doing this sign for Zach. Very cute. She doesn't know all of the letter sounds yet because that's the hardest for her because of the hearing problem, but she's got almost all of them, some of just the infrequently used letters. She's reading lots of words now, short sentences and simple stories. She's typing letters, typing on the keyboard and writing little stories. And again, we see this huge growth in her language skills. So did you see her signing the, like the articles in sentences? And this is a girl who for 2 years had had as a goal to match two objects together and supposedly was making no progress. Those 3 kids I showed you are just part of many kids that we've had through the project. They've been as young as 3, like Anna, and as old as adolescents. We tend to work so that we know we have experimental control for our intervention with the kids who are not getting literacy instruction. So they are either the kids who've been sent out of the academic stream at school and are in a life skills stream, or the very young kids. We have kids who've had autism, cerebral palsy, developmental apraxia, Down syndrome, multiple disabilities. They've used a wide range of systems. We're very excited. We've had 100% success rate. We have taught all of them to read and write. And they're all able now to read simple books and write simple stories. And the schools and families have been very happy. So just to end, I hope I've shared with you some of the science of what we've done. And that's, the components that we talked about, and then making sure with each child that they're effective. But I think more than anything, the science alone is not enough. There's also an art to all of this, and that's really that fundamental belief and the commitment on your parts to the right of all individuals to have the chance to learn and to seek their full potential, to have a chance. So I was just going to leave you quickly with Sandra. She's one of the adolescents who came to our project never having a chance to learn how to read. She was 14 years old when we started with her, and she also had cerebral palsy. And we worked with her once a week for a 3-month period. So after about 12 weeks, she was up and reading. And this is a conversation she had with one of our students, Jennifer, who had been teaching her to read, about her whole experience learning how to read. So lots of resources for you on the web. We have a website with many videos of different kids, so not the ones I showed you today, but of different kids, different ages, etc. We have a webcast up there with different examples in there. And then for those of you that work just with kids with autism or work with kids with autism, we also have a webcast that focuses just on our work with kids with autism and on some of the older kids, Bren, that I talked about. And for those of you that are interested, we have a main AAC at Penn State website where you can get to all of our web resources. So that's aac.psu.edu. In your handouts, there's also, this is our website, and then there are also lots of publications that you can look at as well. Thank you so, so much. You've been wonderful as a group.